we will have a look at what is relational database management system, right? So I already informed that relational database management system is one of the DBMS way that it will help you to make your data is like more easily accessible, and there are lots of features we have for RDBMS. So first let's have a look at what is a relational database management system. So basically relational database management system, which is in short known as RDBMS, is used for database management system that we all know. The concept is based on the relation model as introduced by E.F. Codd, right? Now we will have a look at what is basically stands for and what are the properties we have for RDBMS. The relationship between the data files is relational in RDBMS. They connect the data and the different files by using common data numbers or maybe using key concepts. So we will have a look at after this what are those key concepts and how we are going to use that key concepts, right? So let's have a look at what are the properties we have for RDBMS. So we have values are atomic in RDBMS. Each row is different and columns are also different. Each column can have a common name. And the integrity constants help to maintain the data consistency for multiple tables. So these are the properties we have for RDBMS. And there are lots of other properties is also there in RDBMS. And that will basically help you to have a proper structured way to solve your or to store your data, right? Now we will have a look at, so what are the difference between database management system and the file system, and why should you go for database management system, right? So DBMS is a collection of data, but user is not required to write the procedures to manage the databases. So whenever you want to manage your database, that time DBMS has its own features which will actually help you to proceed your data. But in the case of file system, it is basically a collection of data obviously, but any management with the file system has to write the procedures. So now we will have a look at the difference between DBMS versus file system. And why should you integrate your database to DBMS? And what are the features and advantages we get when we use DBMS, right? So let's have a look at the file system is basically a collection of data that we all know. And any management with the file system has to write the procedures, right? Whenever you are going to make your data stored in file system or you want to manage them, you need to have a manual effort. In the case of DBMS, this is also a collection of data, but user is not required to write the procedures to manage the data. So DBMS basically helps you to reduce the human effort, and it is more of an automatic task, right? So this can be the main reason why should you go for DBMS. Now let's have a look at the second reason. File systems are not efficient for storing, retrieving of data, right? So let me give you an example that whenever you are going to store a data in an Excel, right? So we know like for the most of the cases we go for Excel. So if you want to go for Excel and you have a huge number of data, from that data, if you want to retrieve your data or if you want to find a data from that, like from Excel, it is quite time consuming and quite difficult, right? And this is also takes a human effort. Whereas DBMS is efficient to use as there are large of varieties of techniques to store and retrieve the data. So this is why DBMS is accepted all over the world because of its flexibility and large varieties of technique. Then we will have a look at the file system, the third reason. The file system does not have crash recovery mechanism, right? Example, like while we are entering some data into the file, if the system crashes, then content of that file will be lost, right? But whereas the DBMS, so in the case of DBMS, if you have a crash recovery option, right? We already have a crash recovery option, which is protects the user from the effects of system failure, right? So this is why, and this is how DBMS is helping us to protect our data every way. And protecting the file using file system is very, very difficult. So already we have talked about that file system is not secure, whereas DBMS has its own security process to save the data. And you have lots of options by which you can make your data more protected, right? Now let's have a look at what is the difference between DBMS and RDBMS. Okay, so we know there are lots of DBMS we have. For the part of one of the part is RDBMS. But why RDBMS are using all over the world and why it is so popular? So let's have a look at that. So DBMS stores data as file. In the case of RDBMS, stores the data in a tabular form. In DBMS, data is stored in two ways. One is hierarchical form and or a navigational form. But in the case of RDBMS, the table have a classifier known as primary key. So we will also have a look at what is primary key. And then the data values are stored in a tabular format. So these are the main two key points and the catch for RDBMS. So basically I will give you a little brief about primary key. So primary key helps you to make your data less redundant, right? And your data most compact and in a structured way. Okay. Now let's come the concepts of normalization. So normalizing a data is one of the most important part wherever you are going to store your data. So we'll have a look at that as well. So in the case of DBMS, the normalization is not needed for the database. So normalization is the most important part whenever we are going for the storing our data. We will have a look at that as well. Why normalization is required when you go for storing your data, right? And in the case of RDBMS, you need to follow all the normalization rules to store your data. Okay. Now let's have a look at DBMS does not have any security for data manipulation. Okay. But in the case of RDBMS, it has the integrity constraint for the purpose of ACID. But what is ACID? So basically ACID is basically if you want to break them. So A for atomicity, C for consistency, I for isolation, and D for durability, right? So this property makes RDBMS one of the most popular using database management system, right? Now let's have a look at the second option. So in DBMS, there are no relation between the tables. So if you want to make a relation between your table, you cannot do that. But in the case of RDBMS, there should be a relationship between the data values. It will help you to retrieve your data, to structure your data more efficiently, right? Now, have a look at DBMS is used for small organization. We can understand from the features itself only, and always deals with small data. It also supports single user. But when we go for RDBMS, it is basically used for large data. Because why? Because whenever we have large data, we can make relation between them. And it also supports multiple users. So the examples of DBMS is basically XML files and file systems. But for the RDBMS, we have MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, Postgre, etc. Right? So I hope you can understand what's the difference between DBMS and RDBMS.